I never thought my own daughter would leave me out in the cold. It was a cold deeper than any Austin winter. A chill born from betrayal, not weather. I never imagined the man she married would strip me of my dignity, and that she would stand by silently as he did. They underestimated the quiet fire inside me, a fire that had not yet found its fuel, its strategic purpose. This wasn't merely personal. It was a demonstration of power. This isn't just a story. It's a reckoning, spoken now that the dust has settled, the consequences laid bare. My name is Margaret. I am 58, until recently. I still believed in something called unconditional love, especially when it came to family, a belief that proved to be a critical vulnerability. That illusion was a luxury I could no longer afford in this new, harsh reality. I built my life around my husband and Amanda, our daughter. Every meal, every saved dollar, every future dreamed. It was all for them. When my husband died from cancer last year, it felt like the floor vanished beneath me, leaving me adrift. I clung to Amanda then, my last lifeline, believing her love would be my anchor in the storm. I sold the house we built in Cedar Park, just north of Austin. Too many ghosts lingered in the quiet rooms, too many echoes of a life now gone. Amanda, or rather, Amanda and Chad, offered me a place to stay, a temporary shelter. He barely looked up from his phone when I moved in, a clear signal of my diminished status. I understood the unspoken rules immediately. I was an inconvenience, an outsider, not family, and I tried not to make waves. I kept to my small room in the back, a self-imposed exile. I cooked, cleaned, and offered to run errands, always trying to be helpful, to stay invisible. But Chad had a way of making me feel unwanted, his eyes carrying a constant irritation. It was like I was a splinter under his skin, a foreign object in his meticulously controlled domestic sphere. And the subtle jabs began, a slow drip of contempt. He'd roll his eyes if I asked a question, a dismissive gesture. He'd change the TV when I was mid-show, asserting dominance through petty acts. Once, I heard him mutter freeloader as he passed by me in the hall, a word meant to wound. I tried to convince myself I misheard, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. Amanda, my daughter, said nothing, her silence a profound complicity. I looked to her for backup, for a word, any defense. But she'd always play it down, a practiced dismissal. He stressed, "Mom, work's been rough." I swallowed the shame, accepting this new, diminished role, believing that's what mothers do. But that night, that one night at the dinner table, it shattered me, exposing the fragile foundation of my acceptance. Chicken pot pie, his favorite, sat between us. Amanda scrolled on her phone, lost in a digital world. Chad sipped beer, his usual ritual. The silence stretched, heavy and taut, a wire vibrating before the snap. The air itself felt thin, charged with an unspoken tension. Then, out of nowhere, Chad looked up, his gaze cold, direct. "You know, maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." Amanda froze, her phone forgotten. I stared at him, my mind reeling. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He smirked, enjoying my confusion. "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not contributing. We've got bills." He leaned forward, sealing my fate with his words, "We didn't sign up for extra mouths to feed." My breath caught. A physical blow. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned to Amanda, desperate for a sign, for any flicker of the daughter I knew. Her eyes wouldn't meet mine. A betrayal in itself. "Maybe it's best," she mumbled, "if you find something more stable, for everyone's sake." Everyone's sake. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just stood, walked to my room, and packed 2 suitcases. That was all that remained of my life. The physical remnants of a sudden, brutal eviction. 2 suitcases. That was my life now, neatly condensed into a manageable burden. I didn't cry while I packed. The shock had numbed me. The tears came later, when I stood outside their building, the wind biting through my coat, and realized I had nowhere to go, no one to call. Amanda didn't walk me out. Chad didn't even bother pretending. I sat on the curb for an hour, phone dead, heart colder, utterly erased from their narrative. This is what it feels like to be erased, I thought, a quiet conclusion in the darkness. That night, I checked into a motel, the kind where the wallpaper peeled, and the vending machine ate your change. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything could turn so cold, so quickly. What had I done to deserve such abandonment? Such a swift, merciless disposal? The next morning, I sent Amanda a message. Simple words. "I understand. I love you always." No reply. The next week, another. Then another. Birthdays. Little updates. Silence. 3 months passed, each day longer than the last, stretching into an eternity of neglect. I tried applying for jobs. Anything. But a grieving widow in her late 50s with no recent work history wasn't what anyone wanted. The market, I learned, was as merciless as family. My body wasn't the same. The aches were deeper, the energy gone. Cleaning houses, babysitting, these simple labors felt beyond me. Loneliness suffocated, a heavy blanket of isolation. Shame burned, a constant companion. I had given everything to that girl, my entire existence. How could she turn her back so easily, so completely? This was the true price of misplaced trust, a profound lesson in the economics of loyalty. One evening, sifting through keepsakes, trying to grasp at something familiar, anything to anchor me, I found it. My mother's old diary. I hadn't read it in years. Maybe never. A forgotten relic. But something pulled me. A silent whisper from the past. A thread of history waiting to be unspooled. It felt like a deliberate intervention. A hidden piece of information now coming to light. On the edge of the motel bed, I turned the pages, the paper brittle with age. And then I found it. A name, a truth, a secret that changed everything, illuminating the shadows of my own life. I remember the moment clearly. My hands shook. My heart raced. Suddenly, I wasn't just the mother cast aside, discarded. I was a key to a different narrative, one they hadn't written, one with far more power than they could imagine. I was someone else entirely, and for the first time in months, a smile, slow and deliberate, crept onto my face. They thought they had discarded me, rendered me powerless. They thought I was done, broken beyond repair. But they had no idea. I wasn't broken. I was just recalibrating. And the game, The real game was about to begin, with new players and unforeseen stakes. The days blurred into each other, gray watercolors bleeding on a wet canvas. The motel room smelled of stale air and distant cigarettes, a lingering odor of quiet despair. The buzzing hum of the vending machine outside my door became a lullaby of defeat, a constant reminder of my precarious existence. I moved through it all, a ghost in my own life, unnoticed, unlamented. I stayed quiet, conserving what little energy I had left. My tears were silent, my body trembling, kept inside because no one was coming to comfort me, no one to witness my sorrow. On the fourth day, a tentative text to Amanda, "I'm okay. Just wanted to know how you are." No reply. The silence was a wall she built, a clear demarcation line in our fractured relationship. 2 weeks later, a simple heart emoji. Still nothing. I tried to believe she was busy, that she'd come around, that Chad must be twisting things. But as the weeks rolled on, that desperate hope started to rot inside me, a foul decay. My money thinned, a steady drain I couldn't stop. The work search was relentless, a series of polite rejections. Part-time jobs were elusive. I was either overqualified or simply too old, too tired. A system designed to discard those without immediate utility. It was a bitter lesson in raw economic vulnerability. One night, on the floor of that room, I sorted through the only box I had brought with me that wasn't clothes. It was a dusty memory box from the house, filled with echoes. Old photos, a few brittle letters, and, tucked at the very bottom, a small leather-bound book, my mother's diary. It surprised me. I don't remember packing it. Yet, there it was. The leather felt cool in my hands, a forgotten artifact. Now a strange, unexpected lifeline. I lit the old lamp on the side table, its dim glow illuminating the worn pages. Her handwriting, the same neat loops and precise strokes from the notes she used to slip into my lunchbox as a kid. At first, it was ordinary stuff: weather, church, complaints about grocery prices, the mundane details of a life lived. But then I got to the entry, dated June. He came again today. Said he wished things were different. He wished I could be his wife, she wrote. But he had a family, a business, a name to protect, a legacy to uphold. Margaret will never know. She must never know. The words were stark, a command from the grave. I just pray one day she understands how much I loved her, even if she was born out of mistake and desire. I read it twice, my breath catching in my chest. This wasn't just a secret. It was a foundational lie of my existence. Entry after entry unfolded, a hidden narrative. Hints, memories, clandestine meetings at hotels, small cash payments she tried to refuse but needed desperately. She never named him in full, only initials, HJS. But then another entry, February. He said he'd made arrangements that if anything ever happened to him, he'd ensure Margaret had something, a part of what he built. It won't be official. Of course. It's too dangerous. But he promised me a trust, a letter, a hidden legacy, whispered through decades, now revealing itself. He said his lawyer, Mr. Goldstein, would know. That name, it hit me like a physical punch. Goldstein. I'd seen it before, on old legal documents, forgotten in dusty files. It took me 2 days and several online searches from the motel's shared computer. But I found him. Leonard Goldstein, a retired estate lawyer, is still listed under a private firm in Dallas. A thread to pull. A door to open in a labyrinth of secrets. I didn't call. I couldn't. My hands trembled too much, betraying my newfound resolve. Instead, I sent a letter. A real handwritten letter, explaining who I was, who my mother was, and begging for a conversation, for an explanation. 2 weeks later, I received a call. I remember the way his voice cracked when I mentioned my mother's name. He knew. He truly knew her. Not just professionally, but personally. "I always wondered if you'd reach out someday," he said, his voice grave. "There's something you need to see." I took a Greyhound to Dallas the next morning, my suitcase half-packed, a hedge against cynicism, against disappointment. But when I walked into that quiet office, filled with old books and even older silence, I knew it was real. The air in there smelled of secrets and overdue truths. A heavy, tangible history. He handed me a sealed envelope, yellowed and fragile, almost crumbling to the touch. It was from Harold James Sterling, the founder of Sterling Energy, a name I knew from newspaper clippings, a titan of Central Texas oil, a man with immense power and a carefully constructed legacy. The letter, addressed simply to my daughter, Margaret Louise, was a shock. I couldn't read the whole thing in one go. The weight of hidden power and unspoken truth pressed down on me. I cried before the second paragraph. Tears of a lifetime of questions finally answered. He admitted everything. The affair. The regret. The silent love he carried. And then the promise. "In the event of my death, I have insured a portion of my personal assets, untraceable through my estate, are to be delivered to you via Mr. Goldstein. You are my blood, and though I was too much a coward to claim you in life, I claim you now in death." A declaration of lineage, late but profound. Mr. Goldstein slid a folder across the table. Inside, bank accounts, a modest investment portfolio, ownership papers, titles, the total value, a little over $1 million. I stared at the papers, then at him, my mind struggling to grasp the enormity. "This is real," I whispered. He nodded, his gaze compassionate. "It's yours. Always was." My heart thundered. Not because of the money itself, but because, for the first time in my life, I felt chosen. Seen. A late inheritance. More than just capital. It was validation. A recognition of my rightful place. I didn't scream or laugh or break down. I just sat there, quiet as a whisper, letting the truth wash over me like a long-awaited rain. That night, back in my motel room, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, just as I had for months, lost in thought. But this time, with a slow, deliberate smile creeping onto my face. They thought they discarded me, rendered me powerless. They thought I was done, broken. But they had no idea. I wasn't broken. I was just recalibrating. And the game, the real game, was about to begin. With new players and unforeseen stakes. I didn't rush back to Austin right away. Something inside me had shifted permanently, fundamentally altered by this new knowledge. I wasn't just Margaret, the forgotten mother, the grieving widow. I was someone new now, Someone who had been lied to her entire life and finally saw the truth. For the first time in months, maybe years, I wasn't drowning in shame. I was breathing clarity. The past, once a heavy burden, was now leverage. A strategic advantage I never knew I possessed. I stayed in Dallas for a few more days, allowing the revelations to sink in, to reshape my perspective. Walking neighborhoods, sipping coffee in silence, watching people live their lives, their everyday dramas unfolding. People untouched by my kind of betrayal, unaware of the hidden currents of power. I didn't envy them. I studied them. I wondered who among them wore smiles that masked heartache, who had been betrayed, who had clawed their way back from invisibility. I was learning a new kind of observation, a detachment necessary for strategic thinking, for operating within a system that often hides its true mechanisms. Leonard Goldstein didn't just give me the inheritance. He gave me time. Time to process, to understand what I now held in my hands. It wasn't just wealth, mere money. It was power. A new kind of capital, liquid and potent, ready to be deployed. I didn't know exactly what to do with it. But grief, when steeped in enough humiliation, becomes potent fuel. It was the catalyst for a new economy of vengeance, a carefully planned response to their dispossession. When I finally returned to Austin, I didn't go back to the motel. That chapter was closed. I booked a short-term rental downtown, just off South Congress. A clean, modern, quiet space. It was the kind of place Amanda and Chad would never imagine me affording. A subtle statement in itself. I began dressing differently now. More polished. More deliberate. Invisible. Yes, but in a new way. The kind of invisibility that grants access. That opens doors without a sound. A new uniform for the battles ahead. I immersed myself in online learning. YouTube videos on investing, real estate, and contracts. I learned the language of business, its complex grammar and ruthless logic. Not because I wanted to build an empire, but because I wanted to protect myself, to build an impenetrable armor. Never again powerless. Knowledge, I understood, was the ultimate defense in this new game. A shield and a sword combined. Then I found it. The listing was buried on a real estate auction site, almost an afterthought. A multi-unit apartment building in East Austin, a little rundown, but structurally sound. The location, the exact complex where Amanda and Chad lived. I sat there staring at the screen, heart pounding with a strange mix of disbelief and grim satisfaction. It was listed as a distressed property. The owner defaulting on property taxes. Auction scheduled in 2 weeks. A strategic target had presented itself. A tangible point of intervention in their lives. No hesitation. With Mr. Goldstein's guidance, I formed an LLC, an anonymous shell company. A legal entity designed for discretion. A corporate veil to conceal my identity. I filed the paperwork, transferred the funds, and placed the bid. I wasn't planning revenge. Not exactly. But a calculated move to seize control of the one space they believed was theirs, their sanctuary. The power shifted. Silently. Legally. Laying the groundwork for a new dynamic. The auction came and went. I won. Quietly. Legally. Entirely under the radar of their awareness. And just like that, I owned it. The building where they lived. Where they had cast me out with 2 suitcases and a hollow excuse. Where they had humiliated me in my lowest moment. I remember sitting at my desk, looking at the deed, and whispering aloud, "Let's see how Chad likes paying rent to a mouth he couldn't feed." The irony. A precise, surgical cut. A month later, the notification letters were sent out to all tenants. Rents would be reassessed. Lease terms reviewed. Standard operating procedure for a new owner. And for Chad and Amanda, the new amount was triple. Not double. Triple. Market value. Plus overdue fees from the distressed sale. He must have exploded. I didn't need to see it to know. I could feel his rage from miles away. A predictable seismic event. But it wasn't about money for me. It was about pride. Chad was a man who needed to feel in control. And I had just pulled the rug out from under him. Silently. Effectively. It was a silent, economic coup. Executed with surgical precision. Amanda tried to call me 2 days after the notice, her voice hesitant in the voicemail. It was the first time she reached out since the night I left. A desperate plea for connection. "Mom, I don't know if you heard, but something weird's going on. Our rent just shot up. Chad's losing it. Can we talk?" I didn't respond. This wasn't about vengeance. This was about gravity. They needed to feel the weight of their choices. A natural consequence of their actions. Finally landing. Late one night, I drove by the building. Their lights were on. I could see shadows moving behind the curtains. A domestic drama playing out in miniature. Amanda pacing. Chad yelling. His silhouette unmistakable. I watched them for a minute. A silent observer in the darkness. Then I drove away. The theater of their unraveling had begun, and I had a front row seat. Invisible but present. Part of me felt hollow, a lingering wound from the past. Part of me felt profoundly vindicated, a quiet satisfaction in the turning tide. And part of me still hurts like hell, because even now, knowing what I knew, holding what I held, I would have given anything to be invited back in. Not to the apartment, but to my daughter's heart. But I knew that wasn't possible. Not yet. So I stayed silent. And I waited. Because sometimes the loudest justice is the one that doesn't say a word. Allowing events to speak for themselves. I wasn't finished. This was just the opening gambit. The initial move in a longer, more complex game. I didn't realize how much I had changed until I saw Amanda at the grocery store 3 weeks after the rent increase. She didn't see me. I was 2 aisles over, hidden behind a rack of discounted cereal, observing from a safe distance. She looked tired. Not just tired, but worn down, etched by stress. Her hair was tied back sloppily, the way she used to do when she'd been crying. A clear signal of her distress. Her appearance was a stark reflection of their new economic reality, a visible mark of their struggle. Her cart was half empty. Mostly cheap staples, rice, eggs, and a few off-brand cans. It was a budget shopper's haul, a stark contrast to their previous lifestyle. I should have walked away. I didn't. I followed her through the store at a distance, heart pounding like I was doing something wrong, an involuntary connection to her pain. She paused in front of a small box of mac and cheese, then looked down at her phone, perhaps a text from Chad. Her shoulders sank. She put the box back. A small act of deprivation. That moment broke me. Not pity, but a cold clarity about their struggle and the choices that led them there. I remembered the little girl who used to run to me crying when she scraped her knee. The one who asked me every night to check for monsters under her bed. And now she was living with one. A monster of her own making, of her own complicity. I drove home that day and sat on the couch in silence for hours, staring at the window, thinking about how life had twisted us into strangers, into adversaries in a quiet war. But I reminded myself, this wasn't punishment. This was a consequence. The market, I knew, always corrected itself. So too did life's balance sheets, inexorably, with unforgiving precision. Consequence was long overdue. I had plans now, meticulously laid out. Not just for the building, but a quiet, slow chess match. Every move calculated, every step thoughtful. With the LLC fully in place and the property legally transferred, I started repairs. Small ones at first, leaks, broken locks, flickering lights, the essential upgrades of property management. Chad never noticed. He was too distracted by the rent increase, consumed by his own outrage. He was too distracted by the rent increase, yelling at the property manager by email, demanding answers. A futile exercise in misdirected anger. But I knew him, knew how his ego worked. He wasn't going to move. He'd see that as defeat, a public capitulation. And Amanda, I knew, would follow his lead, as she always did, trapped by loyalty and inertia. So I kept going, knowing the game required patience, an understanding of the opponent's psychology. I changed the property signage. A subtle rebranding. I had a security camera installed near the lobby, a deterrent and a watchful eye. I updated the tenants' mailboxes, all under the name of my company, ML Holdings, short for Margaret Louise. No one knew who was behind it, maintaining my strategic anonymity. Then came the notice for annual, mandatory inspections. Chad sent a furious response through the tenant portal, filled with empty threats and self-righteous indignation. I smiled while reading it. He was unraveling, perfectly on schedule, and I didn't need to lift a finger. Meanwhile, I was becoming someone I barely recognized, a quiet architect of consequence, reshaping not just property, but destinies. I wore my hair differently now. A sharper cut. Sharper clothes. Too. Tailored for purpose. I walked with purpose, and acquired confidence. I started joining small business meetups under a pseudonym, learning the ropes of real estate, building connections, and expanding my network. No one asked about my past. They only saw a quiet, composed woman with sharp eyes and cash on hand, ready to invest. The best disguise, I learned, is the truth you don't say. One morning, I passed Amanda and Chad in the parking lot as I exited a tenant meeting. They saw nothing. Their blind spot was my greatest asset. I kept my sunglasses on, my hair tucked into a sleek bun, documents in hand, projecting an air of professional detachment. Amanda barely glanced at me. Chad didn't recognize me at all. I was utterly invisible to him. Later that night, I sat in my living room sipping tea, thinking about how strange it felt to walk right past your own child and be unseen. Not because you're weak, but because you're stronger than they remember, operating on a different plane. They only knew the version of me they used to control. That woman, I knew, was gone, replaced by a calculated force. The calls from Amanda continued. Soft, hesitant voicemails. Each one a tentative probe. Hi, Mom. Just wanted to see if maybe you had time to talk. I know things have been complicated. I didn't return them. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed her to feel the void she helped create. The consequences of her choices. It was a necessary, strategic silence, a lesson in absence. And every time I felt doubt creep in, a whisper of old affection, I opened my mother's diary. I read those words over and over again. Margaret will never know. She must never know. But I did know now. And with that knowledge came a kind of armor no one could tear through, a newfound resilience. I was no longer the woman begging to stay under their roof, vulnerable and dependent. I was the woman who owned it. The ultimate reversal of power dynamics. The terms of engagement had shifted irrevocably. Revenge. I had always believed. Wasn't about getting even. It was about balance. Justice without fire. A precise correction. Not a raging war. Yet, when I saw the email response from Chad after he received the notice of his rent increase, I'll admit, a small flicker of satisfaction lit inside me. The subject line was itself a performance. Rent increase, unacceptable. This must be a mistake. Tripling our rent? That's extortion. I demand to speak to whoever owns this dump. We've lived here for 3 years and never been late once. This is robbery. Signed, Chad D. Harmon. As if his name alone carried legal weight. His entitlement. A clear and exposed vulnerability in his defense. I read the email 3 times, savoring the frantic arrogance. Then I forwarded it to my property manager with a simple note. Please respond using Standard Clause C regarding market rate adjustments. No special exceptions. Chad wasn't just angry. He was stunned. His arrogance never made room for the idea that someone could outmaneuver him so completely. He'd become so used to being in control, being the dominant force, that the idea of answering to a faceless landlord drove him mad. Amanda tried calling me again that same night. The voicemail was different this time. No pretense. No attempt at casual conversation. The foundation of their world was crumbling, and she felt the tremors. Now closer, more violent. Her voice cracked with desperation. Mom, I know you're not picking up, but I really need to talk to you. Things are rough right now. Chad's upset. He's taking it out on everything. We're trying to figure things out. I miss you. I do. Her voice broke at the end. For a moment, my fingers hovered over the screen. I could call her back, tell her it would be okay, that I'd fix everything, as mothers are conditioned to do. But I didn't. Because it wasn't okay, and I couldn't keep fixing the messes she helped make, the consequences of her own choices. Amanda had let him throw me out like I was nothing more than a bill they couldn't afford, a disposable asset. Now that the pressure was on her, now that her comfort was threatened, she remembered how to dial my number. No. Let her sit in silence a little longer. The market of relationships also demands accountability, a balance sheet of emotional debts. The next week, I authorized additional upgrades on the property. New exterior paint, hallway lighting, and landscaping improvements. Chad's rent wasn't just a punishment. It was funding improvements for the other tenants, for the broader community. That was the irony. A silent testament to his involuntary contribution. Everyone else benefited from his suffering. He just couldn't see it, blinded by his own rage. He began leaving angry notes under the office door. The water pressure sucks. Trash is piling up. If this is what we're paying for, it's a joke. Every note went unanswered. Amanda stopped leaving messages. She started texting instead. Short ones. Hey, can we talk? I really need you. Then silence again. Meanwhile, I watched the bank statements roll in. ML Holdings was stable, profitable, and even. The other tenants were quiet, respectful, and paid on time. Only Chad made noise, and Amanda was caught in his storm, a predictable pattern of resistance to systemic change. But things changed when I received the quarterly report from the building manager. Attached were photos of Chad and Amanda's unit. The bathroom had mildew, the kitchen tiles were cracked, and mail was stacking up on the floor. They were cutting corners, living lean, and visibly struggling to maintain their basic living standards. I should have felt pity, a maternal instinct to alleviate distress. Instead, I felt clarity. This wasn't just about rent. It was about power. And Chad was losing it fast, his grip on his domestic domain slipping away. Word around the building was he'd started taking on extra hours at work, a desperate measure. Amanda was seen crying on the back steps one afternoon by another tenant. A public display of private despair. They were unraveling from the inside out, and I didn't have to say a single word. A new distribution of power was underway. A silent revolution. That was the part I kept coming back to. For so long, I was the one begging to be heard. Begging Amanda to see what Chad was. To see what she was becoming by standing beside him. By enabling his cruelty. Now they were choking on their own silence. On the consequences of their actions. And I was watching from above. Literally. My new apartment overlooked their courtyard. A different building. A higher floor. A safer neighborhood. It was a view they could never afford. A symbolic distance. I didn't watch them all the time. Just enough to remember that I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't imagined the betrayal. That what they did to me deserved consequences. The quiet surveillance was a measure of my new strength. A boundary against past hurts. A reminder of the power dynamics at play. And yet, despite all that, some nights I still found myself sitting by the window, holding my phone, staring at Amanda's last message. I really need you. The woman inside me, the mother, ached. A deep, ancient wound. But the woman I had become, she knew this was only the beginning. I always thought heartbreak came in loud moments, slamming doors, shouted words, public scenes of drama. But the real heartbreak, it's quiet. It comes in the form of a voicemail you don't return. A message left unread. The profound, aching silence between you and someone who once called you Mommy. It was the sound of a contract breached. A trust irrevocably broken. The calls from Amanda stopped. The text slowed. But the damage on her end only seemed to grow. An escalating crisis. From what I gathered through the building staff, the tension in their apartment had turned into open hostility, a corrosive environment. Chad was snipping at everyone, refusing maintenance requests and demanding unnecessary inspections, always looking for someone to blame, a scapegoat for his own failures. Amanda, I was told, looked like she hadn't slept in days, a visible toll of her suffering. The pressure cooker had reached its peak, and something had to give. I didn't rejoice. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't about watching them suffer for my own gratification. It was about something far more painful, watching the daughter I raised willingly stay in a cage and call it love. A heartbreaking act of self-deception. The cost of her blind loyalty was her freedom, her agency. And mine, I had bought my freedom at her expense. A painful truth. One afternoon, my property manager sent over a report after a noise complaint. The neighbor downstairs had heard a heated argument, shouting something about losing control and "this is all your fault." Chad had stormed out and didn't come back until the next morning, leaving Amanda alone. She stayed locked inside the apartment the whole night. Lights off. Curtains closed. A self-imposed prison. The quiet after the storm was unsettling. A broken treaty in their home. A silent scream for help. I waited. Not for Chad. For her. It took 2 more days. 2 long, aching days for her to make her move. Then, just as the sun was dipping behind the trees one evening, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, my building's intercom buzzed. "Hi. This is Amanda Harmon. I was wondering if my mom lives here." My heart stopped. A sudden jolt. I didn't answer right away. I just watched the screen. Frozen. The past was at my door, demanding an audience. And I was the gatekeeper. Then slowly, deliberately, I pressed the door release. 10 minutes later, a soft knock echoed at my apartment door. Hesitant. Unsure. When I opened it, she stood there looking like a shadow of the girl I raised. Pale. Makeup smudged. Wrinkles in her shirt. She looked 20 years older than she was. Worn down by life. We stared at each other for a long time. Neither of us spoke. The weight of years, unspoken, hung in the air between us. Finally, she let out a breath. A long, shaky exhale. "Hi, Mom?" I stepped aside, inviting her into my space, my sanctuary. She walked in slowly, hesitantly, dripping water on the hardwood floor, leaving a trail. I handed her a towel, and we moved without speaking. A practiced, uncomfortable dance. I warmed the kettle, poured 2 mugs of chamomile tea, its steam rising softly. She sat on the edge of the couch like she didn't want to stay long, like she didn't deserve to, a profound sense of unworthiness hanging about her. And maybe she didn't. She stared into her cup, eyes hollow, reflecting a deep emptiness. "He's not who I thought he was," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I stayed quiet. The confession was hers to deliver, not mine to extract or comment upon. Part of me always knew," she continued, her voice gaining a fragile strength. "But I told myself it was stress, that he just needed support, that if I was patient, he'd come around." Still, I said nothing, letting her unburden herself. She looked up, her voice trembling, raw. "He thinks someone's targeting us. He's obsessed. He's been going through my phone, my emails." A new layer of fear. "Last week, he followed me to work. Said he was making sure I wasn't involved." A shiver ran through her, and not from the cold. The surveillance had turned inward. A terrifying domestic espionage. "He asked if I was hiding something." "If you were hiding something," that caught my breath. A sudden, sharp intake of air. She didn't wait for an answer. "I told him I hadn't spoken to you in weeks. That I didn't even know where you were." She paused. A pregnant silence. But that was a lie. I met her eyes for the first time. A direct, unfiltered gaze. "I found your building listed in a security notice. Same management company." I figured it out. It wasn't hard. Of course, it wasn't. Amanda was smart. Always had been. But smart doesn't always mean brave. And now she had finally opened her eyes and hated what she saw. The true cost of her blind loyalty finally laid bare. I didn't speak. Not yet. I miss you, she whispered, her voice cracking with a vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. But I don't even know how to be around you anymore. My hand tightened around the warm mug, a small anchor. You left, she said, the accusation lingering. And I let you at. I let him push you out. Finally, I spoke, my voice low and steady. No, Amanda, you didn't let him. You stood with him. That stopped her cold. She blinked. Her lips parted slightly like she wanted to deny it, to defend herself. But there was nothing left to defend. The truth was a precise incision, laying bare the wound. I stood up, walked to the window, stared out into the night, needing the distance, the perspective. I begged for your voice that night. I said, my words, quiet but firm. Just one word, just one. Behind me, I heard her exhale. A quiet, broken sound. I didn't think it would get this bad, she said. I thought I could manage him. You can't manage a man like that, I said softly, turning back to her. You survive him, or you leave him. She didn't respond. She didn't have to. We sat in silence for a long time. Two women who shared blood but not trust. Not yet. Maybe never. A fragile truce, not a reunion, was slowly being forged in the quiet space. When she finally stood to leave, she set the mug down carefully, her eyes rimmed with unshed tears, her face a canvas of raw emotion. I don't expect forgiveness, she said, her voice barely audible. I just needed to remember what it felt like to be safe. I walked her to the door. She paused, then turned back suddenly and wrapped her arms around me. I didn't return the hug at first. A moment of hesitation, a reflex of self-preservation. Then I did, but gently, cautiously, like someone trying to hold a memory without letting it slip through their fingers. A fragile connection. When she pulled back, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me one last time, a long, searching gaze, and left. And as the door closed behind her, I felt something shift deep in my chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the faintest flicker of something that might one day grow into it, if she let it. A fragile opening for future negotiations. A tentative step toward rebuilding a broken bridge. The invitation went out on a Tuesday morning, quietly, professionally, without fanfare. It was an attendance meeting to discuss upcoming building renovations, scheduled in the common room the following week. Mandatory attendance. Questions welcome. I knew Chad would be there. I knew he wouldn't be able to resist. His ego too wounded to stay away. He wanted a name. A face. Someone tangible to point a finger at. To confront. To blame. He had no idea he'd be walking right into the hands of the woman he discarded like a broken appliance. Completely underestimating the strategic trap I had subtly set. The day of the meeting, I arrived early, deliberately early, to observe the dynamics. I wore a charcoal gray blazer and dark jeans. Simple, elegant, unrecognizable. My hair, now in soft waves, brushed my shoulders. A stark contrast to the severe bun I often wore for business. I looked nothing like the woman who once begged for a sliver of dignity at Amanda's kitchen table. A transformation both physical and psychological. The common room filled slowly. Tenants trickled in. Some curious, others annoyed, most indifferent. And then came Chad. His swagger, a theatrical performance for the unseen enemy he imagined. he stormed in with the aggressive confidence of a man expecting confrontation. Ready for battle. Amanda trailed behind him like a shadow, her gaze downcast. He didn't look around. I didn't notice me in the back. He only saw the property manager at the front and went straight to him. A direct challenge. "Where is she?" he demanded, his voice thick with unearned authority. "I want to speak to the person in charge today." The manager remained calm, unruffled by his bluster. His bluster was a failing tactic, a predictable display of impotence. "All questions will be addressed during the presentation," the manager stated. A polite deflection. Chad scoffed, a sound of contempt. Amanda looked down at her shoes, avoiding eye contact, shrinking into herself. I sat near the back, silent, observing the unfolding drama, the carefully orchestrated reveal. The presentation began, routine announcements, upgrades, timelines, the new security system, the updated landscaping, the improved insulation, practical changes, smart decisions, all funded in part by the very rent Chad had so bitterly protested. It was a quiet revolution in property management, ironically powered by his own unwitting contribution. Then the manager paused, signaling the moment. "We'd like to thank ML Holdings for their commitment to revitalizing the property and prioritizing tenant comfort," he announced, his voice clear. "The owner is here today. Should anyone have questions." I stood up, slowly, deliberately. The room turned, and a collective gasp. I walked slowly toward the front, calm, steady. Every step, a quiet drumbeat in my chest, a rhythm of earned triumph. The moment of reveal, a strategic unveiling of the puppet master. Chad's face twisted in confusion, then disbelief, then pure, unadulterated rage. Amanda's mouth parted in shock, her eyes wide. I turned to the room, my gaze sweeping across the faces, asserting my presence. "Good evening," I said, my voice clear and steady. "My name is Margaret. I'm the owner of this building." You could have heard a pin drop. Chad stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. A jarring sound. "You," he hissed. "This is a joke! What kind of game is this?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the cracks he had tried to hide, the sweat behind his collar, the puffiness under his eyes, the raw panic. "No game," I said softly, my voice unwavering. "Just business. The market has simply corrected itself. Chad. And now, you pay the price." He took a step forward, his fists clenched, his composure completely shattered. "You manipulated this. You've been behind this the whole time. You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us." I held my ground, unmoving. "I gave you a roof," I said. "I made improvements. I treated every tenant equally. What I didn't do was forget." He opened his mouth to speak again, but I turned back to the group, cutting him off, denying him the stage. "If anyone has questions about the changes or improvements, I'm happy to answer them after the meeting. Thank you." I stepped aside. The meeting resumed, but the tension never left the air. Chad didn't sit down. He just stood there, trembling, furious. Amanda sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes wide and wet. The rules of engagement were mine, now publicly established. When the meeting ended, tenants came to me, a steady stream, shaking hands, asking questions, and thanking me for the upgrades. Some had suspected, a few whispers confirmed. Most had no idea. Their surprise genuine. Chad waited until the room emptied. Then he marched toward me, his eyes burning with impotent rage. "You think you've won," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "But this is nothing. You've made an enemy." I stared at him, eyes level, unwavering. "No, Chad," I said, "I didn't make anything. You did. The day you looked me in the eye and treated me like I didn't matter, you chose this path, and now you walk it." Amanda stepped between us, her own moment of defiance. "Chad, stop." He turned to her, shocked by her interjection. "What did you just—" I said, "Stop." She repeated, louder this time, her voice firm. "She's not your enemy. She never was. You are—" It was a public repudiation, a new alignment of forces, the breaking of a long-held silence. He looked at her like she'd struck him, and in a way, she had. Amanda turned to me, her voice trembling, but her gaze steady. "I didn't know. I swear about the building, the money, any of it." I nodded. "I know. Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, the old pain in her voice. "Because you had to see it, not just hear it," I replied. She blinked back tears, understanding dawning. Chad scoffed, stepping back, defeated. "You two deserve each other." "No," I said quietly, a quiet correction. "She deserves better." Then I turned and walked away, leaving them in the silence of their own wreckage. And for the first time since that awful night in their kitchen, I felt something shift inside me. Not revenge, not satisfaction, but power. Quiet, firm, and entirely mine. The strategic outcome was clear. The battle won. But the war for her heart was still ongoing. 4 days later, Amanda was at my door again. A tentative knock that bespoke lingering uncertainty. This time, she held something in her hands that made my knees buckle the second I saw it. A book. Faded leather. A corner torn. The spine barely holding. A ghost from my past. My mother's diary. I opened the door without a word, the unspoken history between us palpable. She stepped in, eyes wide, her breath shaky, as if she had just completed a long, arduous journey. The past, now a bridge, not a chasm, was finally being crossed. "I found it in my closet," she said, her voice soft. "The last time I visited you, you must have left it behind." She placed it on the coffee table like it was sacred, a relic of immense importance. And for me, it was— I read it, she confessed, her heart in her throat. "I wasn't trying to pry, I swear. But I recognized her handwriting. I was looking for something that made sense, some explanation for all this." Silence fell between us like a curtain, heavy and still. The truth, an unavoidable force, was finally asserting itself. "I didn't know about Harold Sterling," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and regret. "Or the money, or the trust, or any of it." I nodded once, slowly. "I didn't know either," I said. "Not until I had nothing else to lose. When my world was stripped bare." Her voice broke, a raw, painful sound. "Mom! Why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me believe you were helpless?" I looked her in the eye, And for once, she didn't look away, meeting my gaze with a newfound courage. It was a shared vulnerability, a new form of communication, far deeper than words. Because I was helpless, I stated, the memory still sharp. The night you closed the door on me, I didn't have a plan. I didn't have money. I didn't even have a place to cry where someone wouldn't knock and tell me to keep it down. Amanda winced, absorbing the weight of my words. I found the diary at my lowest point, when I was counting coins to eat dinner, when I hadn't spoken to anyone in a week. That diary, I realized, didn't just tell me who I was. It reminded me that I mattered, that my mother didn't just love me. She fought for me, silently, strategically, without ever being able to show it. It was a legacy of quiet resilience, a blueprint for survival. Amanda sat down, her hands clenched in her lap, a silent battle raging within her. I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who could do what I did, she confessed, her voice thick with self-reproach. I keep asking myself that over and over. I walked to the window, stared out at the street below, the quiet hum of life passing by, indifferent to our pain. You didn't become her all at once, I said, my voice soft. It was small choices, letting things slide, choosing peace over truth, believing love meant loyalty, even when it hurt. She stood and walked toward me, a resolute step. I've left him. The words hit the air like a bomb, shattering the last vestiges of her old life. He tried to go through my things again. My laptop, my bag. I told him no. Her declaration of independence was complete, irreversible. That was it, she continued, her voice gaining strength. He screamed, packed a bag, and left. Said he'd be back. I changed the locks the next day, sealing the deal. I turned to her, stunned by her decisiveness. I don't know who I am without him, she admitted, her voice trembling with uncertainty. But I'd rather find out than keep disappearing into his shadow. A silence passed between us, thick with everything we hadn't said, everything that had been released. It was a new chapter of self-discovery, hard won, but authentically her own. Then she looked down at the diary, a profound understanding in her eyes. You didn't deserve what I did. What we did, I can't fix that, but I want to try. I walked back to her slowly, sat down beside her, a gesture of shared humanity. I used to dream about hearing those words, I said, but when you say them now, they don't fix the past. They rewrite it. She looked at me, confused, grappling with the concept. I held her hand gently. You see me now. That changes everything. We sat there together for a long time, the kind of silence that doesn't hurt, but heals, the kind that comes after truth has finally had its say, and a new understanding has been forged. Before Amanda left that night, she paused at the door, turning back to me. You didn't raise me to be weak, she said, a quiet statement of revelation. I just forgot how strong you were. I smiled softly. No, I said, you didn't forget. You just stopped looking. And now she was seeing everything, not just who I had become, but who I'd always been, a strength she could finally recognize within herself. It was a quiet acknowledgement of her own agency, now reclaimed, a testament to her journey from complicity to courage. When the email came in from Chad, a few weeks later, I almost didn't open it. The subject line alone made my stomach churn. We need to talk now. I read it slowly, carefully. His words sharp, frantic, and dripping with desperation. I know everything. About the building. About the inheritance. About your little secret with Sterling. You think you're clever? You think you can ruin my life and walk away smiling? Let me make something clear. If you don't undo this, I will go to the press. Your name. Your mother's affair. Everything. Let's see how your precious reputation holds up when everyone knows what kind of family you really come from. He had finally connected the dots. Somehow, through Amanda or his own frantic digging, he'd discovered the truth. But I wasn't afraid. I had planned for this moment since the day I bought the building. This was a predictable counteroffensive, a desperate gambit. I simply forwarded the email to my attorney. The legal framework was my ultimate defense, impenetrable and unforgiving. By the next morning, Chad received a cease and desist letter, delivered with stark legal finality. In it were records of every threatening message he had sent to the property office, the falsified documents he tried to submit under a fake law firm, and the tampered emails we had quietly traced back to his IP address. There were tenant complaints, maintenance sabotage logs, and even audio clips of his rants from public spaces around the building. We didn't need to press criminal charges, just one defamation and harassment suit, with all its irrefutable evidence, was enough. He panicked. I knew it because Amanda called me 2 days later, her voice shaking with relief. "He's gone," she said. "Packed up while I was at work. Left a note saying he was being hunted. Said you ruined his life. The institutional weight of the legal system was simply too much for him to bear." "He ruined his own Avild," I said quietly. A statement of undeniable truth. Amanda was silent for a moment. "Then I'm sorry again," she said, "forever thinking he deserved my silence." "You were scared," I replied. "I've been there. Fear makes you small, makes you compliant. But you don't have to stay that way." It was a profound understanding of power dynamics, a recognition of the choice to break free, to reclaim one's narrative and agency. It wasn't long before Chad tried to retaliate, posting vague rants on social media, implying corruption, betrayal, and shadowy conspiracies. He never named names. He couldn't afford to. Not after the second letter from my attorney threatened legal action for every word he published. He went quiet after that, publicly at least. His digital footprint, now a liability, silenced him. The information war was over, won by quiet, strategic deterrence. Privately, I knew he'd never forget the day he realized the woman he kicked out with 2 suitcases and a tired face now owned the roof over his head, the lease under his name, and the keys to every locked door he once slammed in mine. The ultimate reversal of fortune. Amanda, on the other hand, was transforming. She moved out of the unit within a month, found a small studio near her job, started therapy, and joined a community art class. She even painted something for me, an abstract of a phoenix in dark reds and golds, a potent symbol of resilience, a new beginning forged from the ashes of her past. I hung it above my fireplace, a constant reminder of her rebirth. We talked more often now, not every day, but when we did, it was real. Honest. No more pretending. No more unspoken grievances. The last piece of the puzzle came in an envelope. Another letter. This one from Mr. Goldstein. "Congratulations, Margaret. The building has officially been transferred. The final tenants have signed new agreements. The lawsuit against Mr. Harmon has been resolved in your favor. You are now free to sell, hold, or restructure as you see fit. The legal closure was complete. All accounts are settled. A clean slate. A true exit strategy. I folded the letter carefully, held it to my chest. This wasn't just about money or property or revenge. This was about truth, about reclaiming my name, my story, my strength, my very identity. The next morning, I called a realtor. I was ready to close the last chapter and open the door to a life I no longer had to survive. I could finally live it on my terms. This was sovereign ownership of my own life, a declaration of independence hard-won. I sold the building in late spring. The final paperwork was signed on a bright, cloudless Tuesday, a day of quiet significance. No fanfare, no ceremony, just a quiet click of a pen, a firm handshake, and the weight of 3 years of grief, betrayal, and silence finally lifting off my shoulders. A profound release. The money was wired to my account the next day. But I didn't celebrate. The transaction was complete. But the deeper healing was just beginning. Instead, I wrote a check, a large one. Half of the proceeds went to a local shelter for women and children in crisis. The kind of place I wished I had known existed the night I stood on that curb with 2 suitcases and no one to call. I asked them to build a wing named after my mother, the Ella Lehner House. It was my way of honoring the woman who gave me strength in silence, who hid a lifetime of secrets so that I could one day discover the truth and become something more than what the world expected. It was a legacy of protection, built from pain, a lasting impact beyond the personal. The other half. I used to buy a small house. It wasn't extravagant. Just a charming little 2-bedroom on the same street where I grew up in Cedar Park. Oak trees out front, a porch swing, enough space for quiet, for healing, for growing tomatoes if I ever felt like trying. A return to simple pleasures. The day I moved in, Amanda helped carry boxes. She didn't say much. Neither did I. Our words were now fewer, but deeper. But after we finished unpacking, she sat beside me on the porch swing, legs tucked under her, eyes scanning the street like she was trying to recognize the girl she used to be. A quiet act of rebuilding, together, in the space of shared memories. I remember riding my bike here, she said softly, her voice wistful. Before everything got complicated, I nodded, understanding the unspoken sentiment. You were always safe here, I told her, stating a truth that transcended time. I forgot how that felt. She whispered, a quiet admission. We didn't talk about Chad. We didn't need to. His chapter had closed without a dramatic ending. Just silence. A non-event. A testament to his fading relevance in our lives. A nullification of his power. He disappeared into a new city. A new job, probably a new lie. A cycle of self-deception. But not before signing a non-disclosure agreement and quietly dropping his threats. The last thing he wanted was another legal battle. Or worse. For the world to see the truth about him. He was a ghost now. His influence diminished to nothing. Amanda stayed for dinner. We made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, as we used to when she was little. Simple comfort food. The simple act of shared memory, a potent force for reconnection, for healing. She laughed when she burned one side. I laughed when she tried to blame the pan. It was the first real laughter we had shared in years. A sound of pure joy. That night, after she left, I stood at the window, holding a cup of tea in both hands, watching the moonlight stretch across the front lawn. And for the first time in a long, long time, I said the words out loud. Not to them. Not even for Amanda. To myself. I forgive you. Because that was the hardest part. Not rising from the ashes, for I was never truly burned. But learning that I was never the fire they tried to extinguish, I was the spark they underestimated. The dormant potential they never recognized. They taught me that silence was weakness, a sign of submission. But I learned how to weaponize it, how to make it my most potent tool. They tried to erase me, and I became someone they could never forget. A permanent mark on their ledger. I sat down on the couch, opened the diary one last time, and tucked a note inside for Amanda to find someday. You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth, and to never forget who you are. A testament to self-sovereignty, a compass for her own path forward. The clock ticked softly in the background, a steady rhythm of time passing. My tea grew cold in my hands, but my heart, it was finally warm, filled with a quiet, abiding peace. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to win. I just needed to be who I was all along. And now, finally, I was home. The earned peace, the quiet victory. My own terms, my own truth, my own sovereign state of being.